Whether you're at an event for the first time or even getting your hair cut, one of the first questions people ask is, "So, what do you do?" It's the default question in our society. We sometimes end up defining people by what they do or by what they can contribute. In the hustle culture of modern life, many of us feel the pressure to live up to some invisible standard. But what happens when we fall short? What happens when life throws us a curveball and suddenly we can't measure up? The need to feel valued for who we are, to have an identity that's not tied to what we have to offer, is something most of us wrestle with at some point in our lives. But what if there's a way to find an identity that isn't tied to your success or performance? What if the core of who you are was already defined by something far greater? Today, we're going to look at an encounter that sheds light on this question and opens a whole new way to view our identity. Thank you for joining me on More to Life.
"3 years sober." That's where she is now. It sounds simple, just 3 words, but each one is heavy. Each one holds 1,000 moments, 1,000 small victories over urges most people can't see or feel. Every single day, it's another tiny fight. Folding laundry, sorting clothes. It's part of the rhythm she depends on now. It keeps her grounded, keeps her steady. One task at a time. One step at a time. Because in recovery, there are no shortcuts, no easy answers. And she's learned that addiction doesn't just go away. It waits, hidden, quiet, waiting for the smallest crack, a tiny gap. Tonight though, she can feel it, closer than it's been in a long, long time.
In this series, we're exploring encounters people had with Jesus, and in this particular episode, we will meet a man who was paralyzed. Now, in a literal sense, this means he couldn't walk, couldn't move on his own. But let's think beyond the physical for a moment. How often can we feel paralyzed by the pressures we face? It can be at work or school, maybe at home, paralyzed by fear, by expectations, or even by the weight of feeling like we're not adding enough value or living a life of purpose. In Jesus' time, being paralyzed wasn't just a physical burden. It carried a social stigma too. People believed that physical suffering was often the result of sin, or it was a punishment from God for something you've done. So this man wasn't just dealing with the inability to walk, he also faced an enormous sense of guilt from his community. It's as if his condition was his identity, defined by his brokenness. Sound familiar? Many of us allow our mistakes or our weaknesses to define us. We let our past or even the opinions of others determine our worth. But when Jesus meets this man, he sees beyond the man's condition and speaks directly to his heart. What Jesus says next is something that speaks not just to this man's physical state, but to his very identity, changing everything. Let's dive into the story of Jesus' encounter with this paralyzed man and see how Jesus offers him and us a new identity.
She scrolls through her phone, aimlessly, just passing time, until a photo stops her. There, on the screen, are faces she hasn't seen in years. Her old friends, the ones she walked away from, clinking glasses, arms around each other, carefree. A world she once belonged to before she knew better, before she needed something different to stay alive. They're laughing, smiling, caught in that moment, raising their glasses high, lost in a world she can't be a part of anymore. It's a photo that stings. The kind of sting that reminds her of why she left. And they don't know why. No one does. To them, she just faded away, faded out, and walked away. She was good at disappearing when things got hard. Always was. She turns her phone over, tries to set it aside. And then she notices something else. Something she'd missed. Something just out of sight. It's a half-empty bottle on the counter, left behind after last night's get-together. She's done this before, over and over, but tonight it feels different. Tonight, that bottle doesn't feel forgotten. Somehow, it feels like it was left there for her.
Mark chapter 2 starts by setting the stage for our story. It says, when Jesus returned to Capernaum several days later, the news spread quickly that he was back home. Soon the house where he was staying was so packed with visitors that there was no more room even outside the door. Mark chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. People heard that Jesus was returning to town. They came from all over and lined up with eager anticipation just to be close to Jesus, to ask for healing, perhaps even extend an invitation to come to their wedding, to get advice, or perhaps even witness a miracle that Jesus was beginning to become famous for. He arrived at the house where he was staying at, and the room was already full of people from all different walks of life. But one thing you did not see in that cramped, hot room was a crippled person. Not because Jesus didn't want them inside, but there just simply wasn't enough room for anyone lying on a mat. This was a standing room only affair. Soon after Jesus begins to teach, everyone's attention was disrupted by the sounds of low grunts and heavy breathing. It sounded like a group of men just outside the living room window was carrying or dragging something heavy. Then they started climbing the stairs on the side of the house, which led to the roof. The crowd inside tried their best to tune out what was going on outside, but they all thought the same thing. They all thought, well, too bad for those guys. They should have been here on time. They won't hear a thing on the roof. The dragging noise finally stopped, but only for a few moments, because it was quickly replaced by the noise of these men hacking away at the roof right above everyone, and to the utter shock of the homeowner. As dust and debris was falling down into the room in the space right in front of Jesus, everyone around him leaned back. Everyone except for Jesus. By this time, all eyes were on him, expecting him to say something about this now very awkward situation. But he doesn't. All he does is look up and smile. It's as if he already knows what's going on. I can imagine Jesus thinking to himself, right on time.
She's cleaned up plenty of times before, faced this moment more times than she can count. But tonight, that bottle sits there like it's waiting for something, waiting for her, testing her. She should throw it out, pour it down the sink, the way she's done before, but for some reason, it stays. And she can't bring herself to get rid of it. She walks around the room, picking up, cleaning, trying to put distance between her and that bottle, trying to keep her focus on anything but the pull she feels. She mops the floor, takes out the trash, all while catching herself glancing back at it, feeling that tension growing stronger. She tells herself it doesn't matter, it's just another day. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she knows tonight, that small crack, that gap is widening.
It took a few minutes of peeling and breaking up the roof before everyone saw what appeared to be a mat attached to 4 ropes on each corner being lowered through the opening where the sun now shone brightly, causing everyone around to squint in that room. When the mat finally reached the floor, everyone now leans forward to catch a glimpse of what was inside. And then they see it. It appears to be a paralyzed man lying on the floor. And then, watch what Jesus says to the crippled man. Jesus says to him, "My child, your sins are forgiven." And then, after a short exchange with a few angry religious leaders about whether Jesus had the authority to forgive sins, Jesus proves he has the authority by saying, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and go home." And then the man jumped up, grabbed his mat, and walked out to the stunned onlookers. They were all amazed and praised God, exclaiming, "We've never seen anything like this before." The story introduces us to a paralyzed man whose condition had rendered him completely dependent on others. We don't know the backstory of his illness, how long he'd been paralyzed for, or what circumstances caused it. But we do know this: he was helpless to change his situation on his own. And in a culture that associated physical ailment with sin or divine punishment, the man's paralysis didn't just affect his body, it affected his status, his dignity, and likely his sense of self-worth. Enter his friends. They were determined to get him in front of Jesus, knowing that this was their best friend's only opportunity at a chance for healing. But when they arrived at the house, the crowd was so dense that there was just no way to get him inside. They could have easily given up, thinking, well, I guess this isn't meant to be. But their desperation drove them to take drastic actions. What they did, lowering their friend through the roof, was no small feat. It took courage, creativity, and persistence. Their actions demonstrated that when you believe that change is possible, desperation can become the fuel for something extraordinary. Desperation for change is something many people today can relate to. Maybe you can. Whether it's emotional or relational or financial, there are moments in life where we can feel so desperate for change. We want it so bad that it can drive us to look for creative ways to solve our problems. Sometimes the things we turn to for help can add value to our lives, but sometimes, if we're honest, we can look for help in all the wrong places that can just leave us in a worse situation than when we first began.
The next day, and she's coming home later than usual. It's been a rough day, rougher than she expected. A small accident, a fender bender on her way back. Nothing serious, but enough to shake her. Enough to remind her how quickly things can spiral out of control. That car was her safety net. The one thing that kept her moving forward. The one thing she relied on to get by. And now, with it damaged, she feels that old familiar weight. She's home, but she doesn't feel any of the comfort she normally does. The first thing she sees is the bottle, still there, untouched. But in that moment, she feels herself slipping, a slow slide she can't seem to stop. She stares at it, and the weight of the day pressing down, feeling like she's barely holding on. And for the first time in a long time, she feels weak. She feels like she might not be able to resist it.
Once the paralyzed man was lowered into the room, all eyes turned to Jesus. Everyone expected him to heal this man's physical body, but Jesus' first words were unexpected. He said, "My child, your sins are forgiven." Why would Jesus start by addressing sin rather than the obvious physical need? I believe it's because Jesus knew the man's heart. He understood that his deepest need went beyond a physical ability to walk. The man needed freedom. Freedom from guilt, freedom from shame that had weighed him down for many years. And by calling him "my child," Jesus not only forgave the man's sins, he restores his identity. In this simple yet powerful phrase, Jesus does something radical. He claims the man as part of his own family now, giving him infinite value and belonging. The man wasn't just that paralyzed guy anymore. He was a loved child of God, a son of the King. This story is transformational for you and me, living in a culture that often ties identity to success, appearance, or what we can offer to society. We live in a culture where it's easy to be defined by what we do, how we look, or what others think of us. But Jesus offers something different. He offers an identity that is not based on performance, but on relationship. I love this quote by C.S. Lewis, who says, "We are what we believe we are." Jesus speaks to the man's true identity beyond his physical condition and invites him to believe in a new reality about who he is. Jesus invites you and me to see ourselves in the light of a new reality as well. One that says you are loved, you are valued, you are forgiven, regardless of your achievements or past failures. You know, another important part of the story is the central role the friends played in the paralyzed man's healing. Verse 5 actually starts this way: "Seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralyzed man, 'My child, your sins are forgiven.'" Mark chapter 2, verse 5. Whose faith was it that brought about the healing of this man? Was it the crippled man's faith? Was it the faith of the guests who were in that home that day? The story tells us that it was actually the faith of the men who brought their friend to Jesus. They are the heroes of this story. Without their faith and determination, the crippled man may never have made it to see Jesus. They were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to ensure their friend received the help he needed. This act of community speaks volumes about how important it is to have people in our lives who support us, especially during times of crisis. You know, the sad reality is that most of us don't have a close friend like that. We have acquaintances and fair weather friends, but many times we fight our battles alone. Despite being the most connected generation to ever exist, people today feel more isolated and alone than ever before. In fact, in a 2019 study conducted by the Angus Reid Institute, they revealed that 47% of Canadians report feeling lonely or socially isolated, with millennials being one of the most affected groups. That's a staggering statistic. That's almost 1 out of every 2 Canadians that feel alone. We crave genuine, supportive relationships, and yet we struggle to find them. The paralyzed man's healing didn't happen in isolation. It happened in the context of community. His friends refused to leave him behind or let obstacles stand in their way. They carried him quite literally to the feet of Jesus. This speaks to a profound truth that sometimes we need others to help us encounter the healing and transformation Jesus offers. Think about how often we try to go through life struggles on our own, hesitant to ask for help. Yet, just like the paralyzed man, we all have those moments when we can't make it on our own. That's why community is so important. It's the vehicle that helps carry us toward healing when we can't walk on our own. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 reminds us of the power of community. It says, "Two people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble." The paralyzed man would have remained on his mat, stuck in his condition, had it not been for his friends. And this story reminds us that healing often comes through the people God places in our lives. Whether we are the ones in need or the ones who can offer help, we are called to lean into community and recognize its transformative power. The friends in this story show us the kind of community that brings real change. It's persistent, it's sacrificial, and it brings us to the ultimate source for healing, and that's Jesus. This story invites us to consider the relationships in our own lives. It also invites us to consider if we are willing to be the kind of friends who will go to great lengths to support those we care about. As the paralyzed man experienced, true healing can be found in the love and faith of the community we have. One of the greatest gifts we can give or receive is the willingness to walk with others on their journey toward healing, toward an encounter with Jesus where true healing takes place.
It's late now, past midnight, and the night feels colder than usual. The kind of cold that seeps through walls that makes everything feel hollow. She's been sitting there staring at the bottle, feeling herself getting closer and closer to breaking. It's all too much silence, too many memories, too much weight. She picks up the phone, dials her sponsor, hoping, praying she'll pick up. But there's only the beep, only the empty space of a voicemail. And she doesn't know what to say, doesn't know if words can cover what she feels. But she speaks anyway, explains it all, the accident, the photo, the bottle that's just sitting there. She tells her she doesn't know if she can hold out this time, that she's sorry and that she wants forgiveness, just in case. She's trying to hang on, but her grip is slipping. "If you can come, please come," she says in a small, desperate whisper. And then her battery dies, the screen going dark, leaving her alone, with nothing but the silence and that bottle still waiting.
Reflecting on the experience of this paralyzed man, here are just a few practical coaching questions that can help you on your journey this week. Number 1, what areas of your life do you feel paralyzed in right now? Is it emotionally, relationally, spiritually, or is it something else? Number 2, who are the friends in your life that you can lean on when you're in need of help? Or do you need to find a support network that can help carry you through the tough times? Finally, number 3, how can you take one step toward asking for help this week, either from God or from those around you? These questions are meant to encourage you to think about where in your life you might need support and who you can lean on during those times. Often we feel stuck or paralyzed because we're carrying heavy burdens on our own, trying to manage everything ourselves. And so this week, take some intentional time to reflect on areas where you're struggling. Ask yourself, who in your life might be able to offer help? Whether emotionally, relationally, or spiritually, identify just one person you can reach out to for support and take that first step. If you find that you don't have a strong support network, this is a good opportunity to explore building one. Consider joining a local group through your community or church, or look for online spaces where people with similar values and experiences gather. These environments can offer encouragement and help carry you through the challenging times. Another way to find community and connection is by following More to Life on social media. There, you'll discover a space where you can connect with like-minded individuals, and it's a way to reach out to me personally. You can send me a direct message if you have any questions about today's message, or if you'd like me to pray for you about something specific in your life. And finally, if you'd like to go deeper on today's topic or others I'm covering in this series, head on over to hopestudy.ca. There you will find easy, interactive Bible studies on various topics that you can choose from. And I'm here to walk alongside you on your journey. I'm ready to support you and pray for you however you need.
She's alone now. No phone, no lifeline. Just her and the bottle sitting there in front of her. Minutes pass and the silence stretching out heavy and thick. She reaches out, unscrews the cap, lets the smell hit her. It's so familiar, almost comforting in its own strange way. She pours it into a glass, watches the liquid swirl, her hand shaking just enough to feel it. She raises it, holds it close. But before she can take a sip, she hears a sound. A knock, soft but certain, cutting through the silence. It's her sponsor, standing there in the doorway, coat hastily thrown on over pajamas, eyes tired but steady. She's here. She showed up in the middle of the night just like that. The two of them sit down at the table, her sponsor's hand a solid, steadying weight on her shoulder. And for the first time in hours, she feels that weight lifting, just a little. They sit, they talk about everything, about nothing. She lets herself open up, lets herself be heard, and when it's time, when the moment feels right, they pick up the bottle, the glass, and together, they pour them down the sink. She watches it disappear, watches the last drop fall, and with it, she lets it go just one more time.
This story reminds us that Jesus sees beyond our outward struggles. He sees the burdens we carry and offers us forgiveness and a new start. But this encounter also highlights the importance of community. The man didn't get to Jesus alone. His friends carried him. Healing often happens in the context of relationships where we can help each other get closer to the source of true healing and transformation. I invite you today to have your own encounter with Jesus. He offers the same love and healing and new identity to you. Famous football player Tim Tebow said, "We are not defined by the things we do wrong. We're defined by what God says about us." There's more to life than struggling with who you think you need to be or feeling like you have no value. Jesus offers you a new identity, one rooted in love and belonging. It's time to start living from a place of knowing who you are in the eyes of the one who calls you my child. What if today is the day you release the burdens you've been carrying and let Jesus define who you are? I'd like to take a moment to invite you to partner with Hope Channel Canada as an agent of hope. You can donate online by visiting agentsofhope.ca. And thank you for partnering with us and making Hope Channel Canada possible.